Hey guys! A conspiracy theory was one of my most requested videos when I asked you guys what you want to see me do. But there is a solid amount of people who hate it when I do conspiracy theories. So if you're one of those people, and for some reason you still clicked on this video, I'm sorry, okay? I'm gonna put out other content, but sometimes I just like to do what I like to do. And conspiracy theories for me are super interesting. What happened in this case is just kind of mind-boggling. And the theories surrounding it are actually pretty interesting, so I'm excited to talk about them. This was suggested by one of you guys in my Jonestown conspiracy theory video. One of you left in the comments that I should look into this, and I did, and I was like, oh my god, I have to talk about it. So if you have any other suggestions that you want to see me do, just leave it in the comments below, and I just might do a video on one. How exciting. This video is gonna talk about death, okay, and people died in some pretty fucked up ways. So don't go and like watch this alone in your house. Oh shit. You're already watching it alone, aren't you? This video is going to be covering the mysterious and bizarre deaths of 9 hikers in Dyatlov Pass. And forgive me throughout this video because I don't speak Russian and I don't know how to pronounce anything Russian. Alright, serious face on. Hit the music. Did it start? I hope it started. I don't want to look stupid. In early 1959, 10 hikers set out for an expedition, and this was in northern Russia. Now these were experienced hikers. They had been on a billion expeditions before. Well, maybe not a billion, don't quote me on that. And this kind of explains why they chose this route, which is estimated to be a category 3 route, which was the absolute hardest at the time. So they chose an extremely difficult route, but they were very experienced as a group. That being said, they were actually all in their 20s, except for one hiker, I believe. So they were very young, but they were still experienced hikers. Now what makes this case so interesting is that the trip was really well documented. So these hikers, they had journals, they took pictures, which I'm gonna actually show you guys. This actually helps us piece together what happened to them before the incident took place. There were 8 men and 2 women who initially set out on the expedition, and the main leader of the hiking group was called Igor Dyatlov. That's why this incident or that location is now called Dyatlov Pass. At some point during this trip, Yuri Yudin, which was one of the hikers, actually got sick and he ended up leaving. This was the last picture that he took with them before he left, and little did he know it was the last time he would ever see his friends alive again. They continued their trip on as normal after he left. There's pictures of them smiling together as a group. Their journals showed that they were excited for what was to come. Nothing about their documentation of what was going on indicated that anything was about to go wrong, that they thought anything was gonna go wrong. It just seemed like they were carrying on as normal. So eventually days passed and the family started getting more and more concerned because Dyatlov actually had promised their sports club that he was gonna send them a telegram, and that telegram never ended up coming. So the families, after some time had passed, eventually demanded for a rescue party to go out and search for the hikers, because although it's normal for delays in these types of hikes and expeditions, like it's normal for a day or 2 to pass what they thought they would need, just because so many things could come up. But at this point, when the families were demanding a rescue party to go and search, it had been way too far past when they should have been back. So eventually they were able to get a volunteer search party out to go and look for the hikers, and what they found was so bizarre. So following the trail of where the hikers would have been, they were able to find the campsite. The tent was like partially torn, and after investigation they actually realized that the tent had been cut from the inside out. So that means something or someone caused them to have to cut themselves out of the tent. And this was pretty bizarre because that pretty much ruined their shelter, and these were sub-zero temperatures. Like nobody could survive in that kind of weather without shelter. So something had to have happened to cause them to cut themselves out of the tent. Their clothes, all of their equipment, their shoes, everything remained at the campsite. Now they found footprints leaving the campsite and heading towards the woods. And what's interesting about these footprints is that they don't seem to be from anyone that was fleeing anything. So I'll show you a picture of them here, but it just seems like regular footsteps. It's not the footsteps that would be caused if someone was running away from something or if several people were running away from something. So that doesn't make any sense, because if something was alarming enough to get them out of the tent to have to cut themselves out of the tent, why would they just walk calmly away from the campsite? And also the fact that some of them would leave their clothes behind, their shoes behind. If they weren't running away from something, why didn't they have time to just grab their shoes and their clothing? It's just weird. But don't worry, it gets way fucking more bizarre. The footprints continued on into the woods, and the rescuers followed them and eventually found evidence of like a makeshift campfire. And next to that campfire is where they actually found the first 2 dead bodies. And forgive me, I'm going to butcher the names, but it was of Krivonishenko and Doroshenko. I'm sorry. Now, what's even more bizarre than just finding these 2 dead bodies of experienced hikers next to a fire is that they were half naked. Yeah, They were in their underwear. They were only wearing socks and underwear in sub-zero temperatures next to a fire. There was a tree right next to that campfire, and the branches on that tree up to 5 meters high were broken. That's pretty much evidence that indicated to the investigators that someone was trying to climb the tree, and nobody really knows why. Were they trying to climb the tree because something was chasing them, or were they just trying to climb the tree to go and see the campsite, to try and locate the campsite so maybe they can go back to it? I don't know. Nobody's sure. But definitely one of the hikers was trying to climb the tree and was obviously unsuccessful. The distance between the campfire and the tent, along that distance is where they actually found 3 more dead bodies of the hikers. And that was of Dyatlov, which was the leader, Kolmogorova, sorry, and Slobodin. Now what's interesting is their bodies were actually found in a position that led investigators to believe they were trying to return back to the campsite. So they weren't going in the direction to the campfire that they had made. They were actually trying to go back when they died. And what's even more interesting is they were found at different distances. So it's not like they were all 3 walking together back to the original campsite. They were all found meters away from each other. Who knows if they literally started dying on the way there and the other people just tried to keep going. Like, I'm just trying to imagine in my head, why would they be separate in a situation like this? But it's very obvious in the way that the hikers were found that it was a situation where all of them were just trying to survive, and whether that meant doing different things or splitting up, that's what they did, which totally makes sense because that's probably what I would do in that situation. Actually, I have no idea what I would do in that situation. Searching for the remaining hikers actually took more than 2 months, and this was for various reasons, but the bodies had actually been covered by 4 meters of snow by then, so that alone made finding the bodies very difficult. And where they ended up finding their bodies was actually in a ravine that was 75 meters further into the woods than the campfire. So that basically means some people decided it was best to go back to the campsite, some people wanted to stay by the fire and stay warm, and some decided to go further into the woods to find shelter, I guess. Now the hikers that were found deeper in the woods than the campfire were actually found better dressed than the others, but not by much. And what's interesting is that some of the clothing of the 2 guys that were by the campfire was actually found on the people in the ravine further into the woods. So it seems that once the men were already dead, these hikers that ended up going further into the woods actually took their clothing and wrapped it around their ankles and just like did things to try to keep themselves warm, but it wasn't very helpful because some of them didn't even have shoes. They never grabbed them from the campsite, so it's not like they had a lot better clothing than the other people, but they, I guess, were a little bit better off. 6 of the group ended up dying of hypothermia. But what's really crazy about this case is that 3 of the group actually ended up dying of fatal injuries. So if all of them had died of hypothermia, you could say, okay, something was an immediate threat in the tent, they went out and they all died of hypothermia. But 3 of them didn't die from hypothermia, they died because they were fatally injured. And wait until you hear about these injuries. 1 of the hikers had major skull damage and 2 of them had major chest fractures, which according to the medical examiner was very similar to a force that was that of like a major car crash. He actually ended up saying that he didn't believe these injuries could be caused by another human, and that was because the force of the blow was too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged. Now yes, that's bizarre that 3 of them even had injuries that bad, but that's not what makes these injuries so weird to me. One of the hikers, Dubinina, which was one of the 2 women on this expedition, was found with a missing tongue. Yeah, you heard that right. Her tongue was just missing. And that's not the only thing that was missing. Her eyeballs were missing too. Now, although the eyeballs missing is also very bizarre, the medical examiner ended up saying that he actually believed that that happened because of body decomposition, so the eyeballs were missing because it was just a post-mortem thing. But the tongue missing was not listed under that section of the medical examiner report, meaning he didn't also state that the tongue was missing because of decomposition. So why was it missing? Did something bite it out? Did she cut it out? Did someone cut it out? I mean, just so weird to me. So the last piece of evidence that they ended up discovering was that there was radiation detected on some of the hikers' clothing, which seems weird, and I understand that, but I'm actually going to explain later on why I don't think that's a very important part of this case. But yes, there was radiation found on a few of the hikers' clothing. Okay, so that's what happened, right? That's the evidence that was found. That's what the rescuers saw. Now let's get into some of the theories of why people believe that this happened. I honestly think that some of them are ridiculous, but I'll explain them anyway because I want everyone to be able to make a fair judgment. And after I go over the theories, I'm going to explain to you guys what I believe happened. It's actually a theory that another YouTuber came up with that to me makes a lot of sense, but there's still like one hole in it that I'm not sure about. Alright, so let's get into the theories. Some people think that it was a Yeti that attacked the hikers, and I'm sorry, it's not funny. Honestly, I can't even like give that theory the time of day, but there is like actual explanations for why the Yeti attacked. I can't. Okay, let's move on. The next theory is an avalanche. Okay, so this is actually one of the more popular theories, although I'm not really sure why. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I'll explain it anyway. So since the hikers were experienced, I guess people just found it really bizarre that they would leave their campsite. So people believe that something had to obviously have happened. Something quick, something that caused them to not be able to grab shoes and gear and just have to go. And according to them, an avalanche could explain that. So they say the hikers either heard or felt an avalanche coming and had to cut themselves out of the tent, and then they fled the scene of the campsite. And while that's one of the avalanche theories, some people actually believe that the avalanche happened, which would explain the injuries that some of the hikers sustained. And they say that the hikers had to cut themselves out of the tent because the snow from the avalanche had actually blocked their entrance of their tent, and so they had to cut themselves out. Now, that being said, there's so much solid evidence that disproves this theory. First of all, there was no evidence of an avalanche at the scene. Avalanches cause different patterns and debris that you're able to detect and say, okay, an avalanche happened here. And none of that was found, so there's no evidence of an avalanche having taken place at all. Also, Dyatlov, the leader, was an experienced skier. They were all experienced hikers, and one of the hikers, Zolotaryov, I know I'm messing that up. He was actually getting his master's certificate for mountain hiking and ski instructing, so these men and all of these experienced hikers would have never set up camp in a place where there could have been a potential avalanche. That just wouldn't have happened. And also, the footprints that were found, like I said before, were not from people that were running away from something. So if an avalanche came, there would be evidence of them running away from the avalanche, and that's not what happened. And if an avalanche came and blocked their tent and they cut themselves out of it, why would they have to leave towards the woods? So that's that theory of the avalanche. And the next theory is, of course, aliens. Any conspiracy theory would not be complete if people didn't believe that the aliens did it. Now, what's interesting about this theory is it was actually proven that on the same night of this incident, another hiking group that was 50 kilometers away saw an orange sphere in the sky. And for the next 2 months after this incident, similar reports of seeing orange spheres in the sky were reported. So that's a big reason why people believe that aliens had something to do with it. Now, aliens or alien contact of any sort would also explain to some people why radiation was found on some of the hikers' clothing, and it would also explain the weird missing tongue and all that weird shit that was found. It's like, I don't know, maybe makes more sense if aliens did it because it is that bizarre. The next theory is military tests. Of course, another common thing amongst conspiracy theories is the government did it. Now, allegedly, there was parachute mines being tested in that area where the hikers were found. If that's true, that would explain the weird lights that people saw in the sky, and it would also explain the obvious injuries that couldn't have been caused by a human, like I said before. Another reason why people believe that it was military tests that caused the death of these hikers was because of the radioactivity. So they believe that the military weapons used or the parachute mines used actually caused the radioactivity in the clothing. But the problem with this theory is that there would be radioactivity found everywhere in the campsite, and there was only radioactivity found on the clothing of 2 of the hikers. And I'm gonna go ahead and tell you a piece of evidence that I've been holding back. I'm sorry. It turns out those 2 hikers that had the radioactive clothing, which technically everything has some form of radiation on it, but it was slightly elevated past what is normal. Well, those pieces of clothing actually belonged to the 2 hikers who worked around radiation. One of them worked with plutonium, and the other one I think worked in some sort of factory that had radiation. The point is, it was totally normal that radiation was found on their clothing. They worked around it. And that also explains why it wasn't found on any of the other hikers' clothing. So I think using radiation to prove the theories, I don't know. It's really a trivial fact of the case once you know where it comes from. So people believe that the parachute mines that were being tested killed the hikers, and in order to cover it up, the military moved their bodies. And they believe that the bodies had been moved because apparently in the pictures of the tent you can see that it was not properly constructed, so the tent wasn't actually put up correctly, which people believe would never have happened with an experienced group of hikers. So they think that the bodies were moved to be staged so that it didn't look like the military did it. Also, apparently Soviet authorities at that time kind of withheld facts of this case, so people wanted to know a lot more and they were very secretive and kind of shady about it. But if you look into other cases from Soviet authorities at this time, that was completely normal for them. That to me doesn't really indicate that they were trying to hide anything. It just is what they did at that time. And the people who believe that the military did it also believe that some sort of animal or something ended up eating Dubinina's tongue, so that's how they kind of explain the tongue incident. Apparently the medical examiner actually found blood in Dubinina's stomach. She was suffering from massive internal bleeding and she had blood in her stomach. I don't know, I mean, that blood could have just been internal bleeding. It doesn't have to be that she swallowed blood when her tongue was like bitten out by an animal or something bizarre like that. Like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. theory, but a person missing her tongue, like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, so what the fuck do I know? Now, those are some theories that people have, and I'm gonna say the theory that I believe the most. And full credit of this theory goes to LEMMiNO here on YouTube. He has a really cool video on this, because remember, this still is a mystery. This is not a solved case. Well, the authorities ended up saying that it was an inexplicable force that resulted in the deaths of the hikers, and that's basically how they closed the case, but to me that's bullshit, and that basically means it's unsolved. So let me explain to you what his theory is. In one of the pictures, you can see that Dyatlov actually created an exhaust pipe himself, right? Like an exhaust system to release the smoke from their cooker that they would cook inside of the tent with. So this was completely homemade. He made this himself. One night they were cooking. They allowed the smoke to exit the tent through the exhaust pipe, and once they were done and they thought everything was settled, they removed the exhaust pipe, and somehow accidentally the ambers of their little stove got reignited. This caused the tent to fill up with smoke really rapidly, and LEMMiNO says that this would have happened in seconds. So anyone who's been in any sort of fire or even around a fire, you know how inhibiting smoke is. You have to get the fuck away from it, like, right away. So the hikers got panicked, they cut themselves out of the tent, and once they were outside of the tent, they kind of realized that they were fucked. There was smoke filled in their tent. Mind you, I'm saying smoke, it wasn't a fire, so don't get the two confused, because if there was a fire, there would have been evidence of a fire. But if the ambers accidentally got ignited and smoke did fill up their tent, once the tent is open and ventilation is provided for the smoke, then that'll eventually go out on its own. So it wasn't a big fire that I'm talking about, I'm just talking about smoke filling up the tent. So once they got out of the tent, they realized they were fucked, they can't go back in. They left the tent quickly, didn't grab shoes, didn't grab gear, but had to walk away from the campsite because they couldn't be around that much smoke. So they start walking towards the woods, which they would know is the only other place that they can get shelter and make a fire and try to stay alive. Now, what I love about this theory is it totally explains pretty much everything except one thing. It explains why the hikers were found separately. So maybe the hikers that were found returning to the campsite eventually realized that they were in danger and they had to go back, and even if there was smoke, they had to try and get their gear. It also explains why there would be broken tree branches on the tree. Maybe one of the hikers was trying to climb it to see the campsite. Maybe they wanted to see if there was still smoke coming out of it. The ones that went deeper into the woods were found in a ravine, right? Now, LEMMiNO actually thinks that they probably triggered a small avalanche or something that caused them to fall, because they were found in a ravine that was like by a 5-meter drop, I think. So if they fell from there, or if they did trigger a small avalanche that fell on top of them, then that would totally explain their injuries. And that would also explain why they were the only ones found with injuries, and everyone else that decided to go back to the campsite or stay by the fire were not injured, they died of hypothermia. Now, like I said, the smoke in the tent would have eventually gone away, it would have subsided, so that explains why there's no evidence of like a fire found or anything. But check out this picture. This was taken the day before this incident. Obviously the jacket's been burned. Did they already have issues with this? Did they already almost have something like this happen? We don't know, but we do know that they had struggled with some sort of fire. Also, there was food left behind, and how old the food was actually coincided with around the time that this incident took place. So it kind of makes sense that they had just cooked and then this incident happened. Now, honestly, this theory, complete credit to him, and I honestly think it's so genius, but there's still one hole in it. Why was Dubinina's tongue missing? LEMMiNO thinks that it's a body composition thing, that it was listed in a similar part of the medical report that indicated maybe it's the same as the eyes, that's why the tongue was missing. But to me, if it was a body composition thing or it was a post-mortem thing, why didn't any of the other hikers that were found by her in the same climate, in the same conditions, like, why weren't they found without tongues? Why was her body composition so vastly different than everyone else's? He kind of says that everyone blows it out of proportion, that the tongue is not even a big part of this case, but to me, I think that's a big part of this case if she's missing her fucking tongue. But everything else that he came up with honestly makes so much sense. I don't know, what do you guys think? I'm actually really curious to know if you guys believe that theory. Do you have another theory? Do you believe any of the ones I talked about? Let me know in the comments below. I love talking conspiracies. I just love it. Anyway, I know this isn't everybody's cup of tea, but if you enjoyed it, good. That's it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel because I put out new videos every Tuesday and Saturday, and I will see you on Tuesday. Nope, Saturday. Bye.